Episode 8, The Bell Island Boom.
What's your ETA? We'll be there in 2 minutes. Come on, we have lives to save here.
Hey guys, how's it going? This is Telltale Guys. I am Zane. I'm with my host Josh. Josh, how you doing since our last episode?
Zane, I'm doing pretty good. How about you? I know you're looking like you're fresh off of some kind of trip.
Yeah, I actually went on a cruise from Fort Lauderdale down to St. Thomas and Puerto Rico. But we actually had at one point we were going to stop by one of like the Princess K Islands, like the islands that they own.
Uh-huh.
And there were like large swells, even though the weather like seemed nice. It was like really sunny, but we couldn't get off. Like they have like little boats that take you to this island. And basically they're like, no, you can't do that. So I appreciate the safety. But besides that, it was really fun. My little pale redheaded baby.
Mhm.
She had a lot of fun on the ship. She was a celebrity, but off the ship, she got all red and hot. And
Mm.
this is too much. I need to. Georgia is hot enough. I don't need to be down in the Caribbean.
Yeah, I guess ginger kids don't do well below the tropic lines, right?
No. She needs to be. We need to move to Minnesota or something like that.
Or perhaps Canada.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so
is that the setting of our topic this week?
yeah, this week we're traveling to sunny Canada where no gingers are at risk of getting sunburned. But yeah, it looks like it's going to be a pretty cool topic today. And we actually have our first interview for the show. So that should be exciting.
Yeah, that's great.
Um,
I finally get some other people on the show besides our ugly mugs and all that. So that'll be good.
yeah. So this week we're going to be talking about Bell Island and specifically the Bell Island boom. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, Zane, but it's
Not
kind of
really.
a unique phenomenon or a very one-off phenomenon that happened up in Bell Island, Canada, off the coast of Newfoundland in 1978. So a little bit back, but let me set the scene for you.
Okay.
So April 2nd in Newfoundland, Canada, 1978, there was a small island community called Bell Island. Let me put up my maps here.
Ooh, okay.
So this is where you can see is Bell Island, way up there. So the community of Bell Island was gathering in the morning or midday for Sunday lunch, and all of a sudden, a giant boom, so loud and sharp, just reverberated through the whole island. And it was kind of reminiscent of a lightning strike, only it was much louder. And as quickly as it entered the atmosphere, silence. And this
Hmm.
boom, Zane, was heard up to 100 kilometers away. That's about 62 miles for us Americans who don't do the metric system.
Of
But
course
as you
not.
can,
Why would we?
but as you can imagine, word of this thunderous event spread throughout this postcard ready community. And soon Bell Island was talking about it, and of particular interest, the focus was around the area of Lance Cove. Let me
Now,
little
can
bit
you?
better idea of Bell Island here.
Maybe you're about to go into it, but can you kind of set the stage of where this is, like, kind of geographically, obviously,
Mhm.
in Canada, but like, is it more on the East Coast? Where is it kind of closest to for the U.S.?
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'll get into it a little bit more.
Okay.
So you have, where Maine is in the United States, and then you have above Maine is Canada. So, in there you're going to have the Newfoundland area, and it's kind of, I mean, how far away is that? It's about a couple hundred miles away from Maine, I guess. So it's, I mean, it's up there. I mean, you're getting cold And
Okay.
if you're on YouTube, you can see it on the map. And I'll show a little bit more details on this as we go through the story as it
It just
progresses.
it looks wet and cold, and I'm not sure how I would feel about living over there or up
Yeah,
there.
it's much more cold than wet, I would say,
Okay.
but it does get a lot of snow as it is up there in the Great White North, as they say. But the particular island, Zane, is small. It's only has about 5,000 individuals on the island, and these people on this island they experienced this boom, right? And it was like a mystery of where it came from because it didn't really seem so much like you know thunder like you normally would experience. So it was a big mystery. What is going on up here?
Hmm.
And I think maybe a better person to tell this story is the eyewitness or one of the eyewitnesses on the island that I was able to track down and get an interview with. Um, and he experienced the sound back in 1978. And I think he would be the best person to talk. His name is Russell Bowers. So I'm going to go ahead and drop us off here and let the audience get the full experience with him speaking. And he can fill you in on a little bit background on the island and also, his firsthand account of the sound. Now, I will note for the listeners, it's a fairly long interview. I cut it down to about 38 minutes for this episode, but the
Mhm.
full interview we'll put unedited on our YouTube site, so you can listen to that, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit. So let's go ahead and hear from him
All right.
right now. All right. So joining us today is Russell Bowers. He has a account here of the Belle Island boom. So we're really excited to get into that. Russell, thanks for joining us.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe where we'd like to start is maybe give us a little bit of your background, maybe what you currently do, where you live right now, and then we can get into the account on the day that the events happened.
Well, these days I'm a broadcaster. I've been in the broadcasting business actually since I was about 18 years old, so it's 30 odd years now. And I currently work for VOCM Radio. It's a news talk morning show based here in St. John's. We cover the whole province of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. Some of your listeners will may be familiar with the name Newfoundland from the Broadway musical Come From Away, which we're all very proud of here. And I've been at this for a while. I actually started out at VOCM in 1988 and went away and worked in other parts of Canada, other broadcasters, and returned to VOCM back in May. So I've been covering the news and local events here with VOCM now for the last couple of months, and I've been having a great time doing that. I grew up on Belle Island. I was born there and basically, didn't really move too far from it until, like I said, I was about 27 years old and decided to see what the rest of Canada looked like.
What was Belle Island like back when you grew up there?
Well, just as a bit of background for you, Josh, Belle Island kind of has two histories. So it started out as just this little farming community, and a handful of farmers moved to this weird little island in the middle of Conception Bay. And then someone noticed the rocks on the island were awfully red. And so they discovered iron ore there. And it became the economic engine of Newfoundland and Labrador through the 1910s, 20s, 30s. And so we were exporting iron ore from a submarine mine on Belle Island that went out 4 or 5 miles underneath Conception Bay. And Germany was our biggest customer through the 1920s and 30s. And then in 1939, we found out what they were using all that iron ore for. So we were very much an economic hub of Newfoundland and Labrador. It relied on fisheries and iron ore exports. So Belle Island had that history up until about the 1950s, and then things started to decline. It was very expensive to get iron ore out from underneath the seabed. So the iron ore company decided to pick up stakes and move on. Through the 1960s and 70s, Belle Island more or less moved into being a bedroom community. A lot of people either lived there or commuted the 20 minutes by ferry and 15 minutes by road into the capital city of St. John's. And that's the community I knew. I wasn't around. I wasn't alive during the heydays of the iron ore mines and the big economic boom that had. The community was about, I don't know, 12, 15,000 people at its height. And I grew up in a community of about 4,000, 5,000 people.
Okay. How big is the island? It's relatively small, right?
Yeah, I think it's about 3 miles shorter than Manhattan, if that's a reference for you. It's
So
3
like
miles,
square
three-
miles, something like
yeah,
that.
3 miles wide, 9 miles long.
Okay.
And it that's the number I always remember as a kid, because even though we converted to the metric system in Canada in 1980, there's certain imperial things that still stay with us. I when I've been to America and someone tells me the temperature, I have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, same way. Like Canada, I don't know what you're up there. I just know it's cold. It could be negative 45 degrees, or it could be 3 degrees. I don't know.
Some parts of Canada are like that. I think right today, as we're speaking, it's 30 something, so it's close. That's close on 90 degrees in Georgia temperatures.
Yes, that's about what it is here today. So we're about the same right now.
Yeah.
What about the island itself? What kind of what's the terrain like?
Flat.
Okay.
It's basically just a big flat top island, not much in the way of hills or mountains and so forth. So it doesn't have much in terms of, it's not very interesting geographically, that kind of thing. But its big thing was the fact that it was basically a big slab of iron ore. And so when
I'm sorry, it's like a rocky type of island, cliffs and stuff, or?
Oh yeah,
forested?
basically it's a big flat island with about, I don't know, a several 100-foot drop off each side.
Okay.
With a handful of beaches that you get down, and one of them's for the ferry terminal that goes in and out. And so yeah, it's basically a fairly high cliffs that are essentially the entire island, with the exception of a handful of beaches.
Is that unique to that island, or like a lot of the islands in that area kind of structure the same way?
Most islands tend to have kind of a slope down to the, you go around like Newfoundland has a lot of islands.
Yeah.
And a lot of them will be somewhat hilly and, slopes down to the sea and so forth. But yeah, it's like Bell Island was just this weird little rock carved into the middle of Conception Bay, this flat, tall island that's right out there.
So it's unique in the sense that it produced a lot of iron ore, and I guess maybe because it was so high up with the cliffs, it provided good strategic positioning, and that's why it got attacked as well, you think? Or it was a good lookout point?
I think it was Bell Island was attacked essentially because of the iron ore shipments that were still going in and out of the docks that were there heading to England. So Germany was just basically trying to disrupt the supply of steel to Britain. So that was the primary focus of there. Like Bell Island wasn't strategically important in terms of the war. Certainly there were no military bases, no military installments on the island. There were other parts of Newfoundland that did have that for the war effort, but Bell Island wasn't on that list.
Okay. So by the time you grew up there, it was kind of like in an economic downturn, I guess, and the population was about a third of it as it was at its height.
Yeah.
And what was, I guess, kind of like a typical day as a kid on the island, or what kind of lifestyle was it at that point?
It's kind of, as I think back on it now, Josh, I think about how unique it was. It seemed fairly normal, I guess, when we were growing up, but
let's maybe get into the day that I guess the event happened, right? That was on April 2nd, 1978, correct?
Yeah, it was a Sunday, I remember. And, I probably would have been, I think, 7 or 8 at the time, maybe 10. And again, just one of those ordinary Sunday mornings, you'd get up and maybe there was a church service on TV or on the radio. There'd be a church service on TV or on the radio. And, parents were flitting about. The church we went to only had evening services, but in a community like that, the Catholic Church would have had morning services, the Anglican Church and so forth. People might have been going back and forth for that. But a big thing in Newfoundland at the time was Sunday dinner. And that was usually, a beef roast or, a chicken. Big occasions, you'd have a ham or turkey and so forth. But the Sunday dinner was cultural in
Sure.
our province. It was when it was the big meal of the week. Everyone in the family was around. Maybe family members and neighbors would come from away to come dine
Okay.
with you that day.
Kind of similar to I grew up the same way. We had Sunday dinners kind of like that. Might be culturally too, because I have family from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, so right near Canada. Not so much where you're from, but
No,
maybe
Michigan
some of that
Canadians.
tradition.
Canadians like Michiganders. They're almost as
Yeah.
good as us. Same thing with Minnesotans. So we have a
Yeah.
strong affinity with Minnesota and Michigan. But yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. There are cultural things that certainly bring families together, and food obviously is one of them.
Mhm.
It wasn't formal. It wasn't something that we necessarily thought about. It was habitual more than anything else, right?
Sure.
And so for a lot of us, that was what we were doing on a Sunday morning, just getting ready for dinner, and then at some
Preparing the
point-
foods and stuff like that.
Yeah. My father did a lot of that on Sundays, but all of a sudden we get this bang. And it sounded like it might have been thunder, but it was, again, louder than you'd normally suspect. It was so shockingly brief. And it wasn't cloudy. It wasn't stormy. It wasn't raining. None of the things you'd expect to have come with a thunderclap. April month is not exactly the sunniest month in Newfoundland ever. In fact, it's not unusual to have snow. And I think, actually, if memory serves, it was snowy that April. And we just heard this clap out of nowhere. And at the time, my mother was very, very nervous about that kind of thing. And so she immediately wanted to run around and unplug the fridge and unplug the TV because the lightning might come and hit the TV and blow us up as well. And, she had a lot of superstitions around electricity, as many people did in that era. But it seemed to, go by very, very quickly.
Did it rattle anything or shake the house or windows that you remember?
Yeah, a bit insofar as what you normally get. If you normally get like a huge thunderclap that's close by and so forth, it's like, oh, that the storm's getting closer, But it seemed like the flash of light and the thunderclap all happened at the same time, which it would when you're standing that close to it. Our house is probably 3 or 4 miles away from where it happened.
Okay.
Not far at all.
Was that so? If the island's oriented, you were living in the south end of the island?
North, north central part of the island. Most of the people on Bell Island lived in that part of the island. The area where this hit is a place called Lance Cove. It's technically a different community. It's not part of the incorporated town that's on Bell Island, but Lance Cove is this nice little rural community almost on the side of the cliff that takes you down to Lance Cove Beach.
Okay.
And it's just a little community of folks that live away from the main center on Bell Island. We would go, there's a road that goes all through Bell Island, and we call it the Loop. And it wouldn't be unusual on a Sunday afternoon to say, oh, let's get in the car and go for a drive around the Loop.
Okay.
Small,
As you would do.
yeah, small town entertainment.
So what happened after you guys heard the clap and the boom?
I don't know. It's one of those weird things because, again, we never really saw signs of a storm or anything. But then all of a sudden, we started getting phone calls, which is how stuff got around at that time. And next thing you know, oh, do you hear the big thunderclap? Oh, did you hear somebody got hit by lightning up in Lance Cove?
Oh.
And that's what we thought had happened. And so I think we just carried on as normal for a bit. And then we ended up having Sunday dinner and as a family. And then at some point said, oh, you got to get up and see Jim Bickford's place. Like, it's practically destroyed.
Well, when the clap happened, that was around 11 a.m. or so.
Around there, yeah.
Okay, yeah. And when you had the dinner, you're talking about early evening, like 5-ish.
So another cultural difference.
Okay.
In Newfoundland, we consider dinner to be something you have at the lunch hour for
Okay.
America. So we consider the lunch hour dinner, and we consider what we have, what you would consider dinner, we call supper.
Sure. Okay.
I think in the American context, maybe supper is like a later thing, like, you've missed your dinner, so you have a
Yeah, it
late supper.
depends kind of where you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know like my family up in the UP in Michigan, they would say supper interchangeably for dinner, what most Americans call dinner in the evening time. So-
Yeah, I think it's because our lunch hours were a bit more. It was more of a made meal as opposed to you were just grabbing a snack of some kind. Right?
Sure.
So yeah, we called dinner was the noon hour. A lunch actually would be something you'd have around 3:00, what the Brits would call tea time,
Okay.
and then you'd have your supper at 6:00 and so forth. So yeah, in our context,
Okay.
Sunday dinner was usually served around noon or 1, give or take.
Okay.
Whenever you got out of church, but.
So about an hour or so after you guys eat your midday
Yeah.
meal, you start.
Yeah, so I'd say around 2:30, we started to sort of find out, something really big happened. And and because we didn't have a lot of social media around us, for contrast, no one was really thinking in terms of anything nefarious. We just heard that there was this big bang, and then someone said, Jim Bickford's place got hit. And so we drove up there to have a look. And we parked on the side of the road, and we went in and saw, look, places looks like it's, set off by a stick of dynamite or something. And
So
we knew
his place is about 4 miles from your house.
yeah, give or take 4 or 5 miles. And it was basically,
Wow.
I think, just the shed that was mainly hit. So I think he lost some chickens or something. And
Okay.
the main house had some damage to it, though.
How sparsely populated, I guess, between like neighbors was it? Were you guys fairly close, or is it more like acres between you guys?
I guess acres, but I mean, like where we lived on Belle Island, it was again the most populous area. Like, your neighbor was as close as your neighbor would be in Atlanta, so people lived fairly close together.
Okay.
Lance Cove, like I said, was just a little more spread out because it wasn't very populated. It was kind of this sort of rustic,
More
almost
farmy type.
pastoral
Okay.
kind of part of Belle Island, and so you would go, a few yards for sure between neighbors, but again, not super long
Sure,
distances.
So you drive over to Bickford's house,
Yeah.
and I guess other neighbors are starting to kind of gather around this location at this time
Again, it didn't really,
and spread that fast.
we weren't, I think people came in waves probably,
Okay.
but I don't think anybody necessarily thought, let's all go gather at the Bickford house and see what happened, right? People were fairly nonplussed about it. Like, I don't recall, I don't know if we talked about it for much longer than that. I know that we did see some reports on television in the wake of it, and it certainly was reported on the big supper hour newscast that we would have here in Newfoundland. And other than like 2 or 3 reports, that was kind of the end of it. And then some months later, there was an extensive report on the CBC. I even remember the reporter because he did so much work at the time, a guy named Rick Seward. And he did an extensive documentary for CBC about the incident and what do we know. I can't remember if it was months or years later that they did it, but they were still kind of questions some months later.
So when you went to Bickford's house initially to check it out, did you see any damage other than the chickens? You said maybe his barn was hit or something.
Yeah, the barn was the one that basically took the brunt of the blasts.
Okay.
And I don't know if there was much in it. Like I said, I think a handful of chickens and so forth called it home. But
was it like destroyed, or was it kind of still standing and just scorched or something? Like, was there any noticeable kind of thing with it?
yeah, to some extent. I mean, it more or less looked like somebody took a backhoe and just knocked it over.
Huh.
Like parts of it was still standing, but you could tell like it had gotten quite a smack, and it looked like there had been a fire. Inside the house, from what I gathered, their television exploded and some other stuff came off the wall, but I don't have firsthand knowledge of that. I just know that's the accounts that were coming back to me and our family about it all. No one was injured as far as I know. And the incident itself was just, like I said, just this weird shock, and we didn't know what to make of it. I don't know at the time if we had anything passing for a context for what happened other than, my goodness, did you hear that thunderclap?
And were other houses or any friends of yours on the island, did they mention any weird experiences with the electrical phenomenon or things happening to their TVs exploding like you just mentioned with Bickford's house?
No, it seemed confined to just their home.
Huh.
We certainly didn't have any damage on our home, and maybe the TV flashed or something, you know.
Okay.
But that was about the extent of it. We certainly didn't have any damage in our home. As far as I know, the Bickford's neighbors weren't particularly damaged. Like, it was so focused, whatever it was so focused and hit just that little spot. It didn't have like a cascading effect. There was nothing to kind of indicate that it had a ripple effect around the area. Nothing, you know, there weren't trees that were decimated or grasslands that had been laid low or anything like that.
Was there any kind of crater or scorch marks in the ground of any sort that you remember?
I couldn't tell you one way or the other.
Okay.
Like I said, it was just a weird thing because it was still quite snowy. And I remember, I think the Bickfords had to like dig a path to even get to the shed to get a better look at the damage.
Was it overcast at all, or was the skies pretty clear?
April snowy, probably overcast.
Okay.
It
How
wasn't,
much snow do you guys get up there around that time? A couple. Feet or something?
Yeah, I think it's not unusual to have like a little late winter here. It tends to start late and stay late.
Okay.
So you would end up having, you know, the snow really start to show up in January, and then by April it's starting to peter off. But it wouldn't be unusual to have a foot of snow or 2 feet of snow on the ground even in April.
How far on the island did other people hear this boom? Do you know about, or was everybody on the island kind of had a?
Oh, everybody knew.
Everybody knew. Okay.
The entire island knew, and then we started to hear from people in St. John's and other parts of the area around Belle Island is not very big. It's you know, you can see, you know, 20 minutes away to land. You know, it's not, you're in a bay, so you can see basically land all around the island. And so, you know, we had heard reports that, you know, people 60 miles, 70 miles away had seen the flash.
Seen it. Okay. And nobody in your family saw any flash though, correct?
I don't recall seeing a flash, and I don't recall anyone else mentioning a flash. We just heard the noise.
Just heard the noise. Okay. And it was different enough from a regular thunderstorm that was piqued your interest of it being a little bit unusual.
Yeah, like I said, it was very definitive. It was very sharp, very short. Again, we just assumed it was a thunderclap, but a very unique thunderclap.
So it didn't sound like a normal thunderclap then. It was just kind of in that family, is what you're trying to get?
Yeah, like very hard, very pronounced.
Okay.
You know, it like, again, not as much of the rumble from what I remember that you normally would have like with a thunderclap.
Would you maybe associate it with the sound of a sonic boom of some sort, like an aircraft?
To be honest with you, yeah, I think that's probably the closest thing to it. And the reason being because we used to hear those on a fairly regular basis when Concorde used to go back and forth between New York and London and Paris. It was actually fairly typical to hear a sonic boom from Concorde.
Okay.
Over our
it was
particular,
different enough from your experience.
Well, just because it was much closer.
Okay, yeah, because
Right.
Concorde wasn't flying over your island.
It was close enough that, you know, occasionally you'd see them up there, but not very often. But again, you'd know when a Concorde was passing over because you'd hear the sonic boom every time it went Mach speed.
Gotcha. Okay. What about I think I saw somewhere that because the Concorde's path did kind of like parallel a little bit to your island, like you were saying, they rerouted it after this incident. Was that a fact? Do you know?
You may have to ask someone else about that. I don't
Okay,
know.
sure.
I just know that the sonic booms were a fairly regular thing when I was growing up. Now, when they stopped, I don't know.
Yeah, I did see something also too around this time. The phenomenons on the East Coast, mostly in the United States, but I think around in the late 70s, there were these booms happening as well. Not quite to the extent of Bell Island's boom, but just these mysterious sounds that would pop up along the East Coast. Is that something? Were you hearing stuff like that before this incident or after the incident?
I don't know if it lingered with us as
Okay.
a population, to be honest with you. Like I said, I know the CBC did a documentary either some months or a couple of years after it all happened. And in the documentary that Rick Seward did, he certainly brought that up. But that's something that I know simply because, it's been preserved on YouTube and I could go back and watch it and kind of remind myself of some of the events of the day. He was the one who kind of went into the deeper detail about the fact that other parts of the eastern seaboard of America was getting these incidents. And then that sort of went down the rabbit hole of, well, is this military testing? Is this something that, either America or Russia are testing and it's top secret and we're not to know about it? And there's all that kind of stuff that kind of came up after the fact. But
Well, what was the chatter on the island? Like, what were they thinking it was after it kind of like everybody had time to process it a little bit?
I'll be honest with you, it didn't dominate the headlines.
Really? Okay.
It was one of those things that just happened and people moved on. You have to remember, in 1978, we didn't have media as an omnipresent experience in our lives, and certainly nothing that reinforced something that just happened. We didn't even have cable news. We had 2 television channels in Newfoundland to choose from in the 1970s.
Ah.
And you had an hour of news once a day that would tell you what was going on. It's not like even in the 1980s, I remember the rerun of the Reagan assassination. My goodness, how many times did that get rerun in the days after it happened? And now, of course, we had the unfortunate situation in Pennsylvania with former President Trump. How many times has that been rerun and will be endlessly commented on and ruminated upon and recycled, and every kind of thing is going to come out of that. But in 1978, it wasn't something that would dominate the headlines. It wasn't something that was reiterated in our consciousness. It's something we remembered having been through and obviously being a singular event, but it's not something that defined 1978 or even the late 70s.
That is a good point. I think a lot of people today forget just how sparse the environment was for media back then. Just how isolated, especially in your particular community there, being kind of like more remote, I guess, than most other places in Canada. You just weren't getting inundated with that kind of stuff. And maybe that was like, maybe kind of a blessing too, because it also helps preserve, I guess, memories of significant events, like the boom, you would think maybe.
It is kind of a weird thing because memory is such a faulty thing. And you have this sense of you're convinced you know how things happened. But I'm convinced about certain things about watching hockey when I was a kid. And you go back now and you watch some of those games on YouTube, and you kind of go, I thought players had their names on the back of the jerseys back then. I didn't realize that player played for them,
Yeah.
And so when you go back and watch the actual evidence of, say, a hockey game, you kind of go, that's not the way I remember it. Like, you might remember the score, you might remember a couple of star players, but there's certain minutia that sort of flies past you. And so as the years have gone by, the exception here is that we haven't revisited it. We haven't mythologized it.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't created some kind of, I guess, cottage industry around it. We haven't put up a fence around the shed and say, come see our, lightning clap shed or anything like that. We haven't monetized it. Maybe we should have, but
it's not too late.
yeah. I wonder if the shed's still there or if the Bickfords have moved on at all. It's one of those things, that sort of has been preserved, in amber in a way. Like it's sort of unspoiled by having other interpretations put on it, at least from my experience and the people I've spoken to.
Yeah.
So and again, I think because so many of us didn't dwell on it, we didn't think to dwell on it. We didn't think to worry about it even.
Yeah, I guess there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to, like the game of telephone, people kind of add their little bit of layers onto it over time as the story gets passed down and retold, just because this particular story hasn't been retold that many times. And also, too, back in the 70s, I guess people weren't so much inclined to dive into, I guess, the weird as so much as people are today. That might have played a key role in keeping it more pure, perhaps.
The stakes weren't there.
Yeah.
You can see why certain events in our popular culture take on this mythic thing. There's high stakes in the Kennedy assassination. There's high stakes in the moon landing. There's high stakes in 9/11. But there's no high stakes in a barn blowing up on Belle Island.
So some chickens, I guess, perhaps.
Yeah, there's somebody who had it out for chickens maybe, went through a lot of trouble that day. But it's one of those things where, like I said, we just had the two channels. We didn't think that what happened in our community was particularly special. It was just our life. It was just our day. That was our Sunday that day.
Yeah, and you have other stuff to do and you move on.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe now with, some perspective on it as you're older now and maybe have talked about this incident a little bit more with other people that have experienced it. Do you have any theories on perhaps what could have happened or what it was?
Well, Josh, the curious thing about conspiracy theories is that all the best ones are unprovable. And that's why they persist. Because if you could prove them, well, then we'd move on with our lives, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But a conspiracy theory works best when no one can prove it's true. And I think for modern audiences, and this story, as you know, has been revisited a few times, and sometimes for entertainment value and sometimes for genuine scientific inquiry. And in this case, it seems like what was going on at the time and the shenanigans of the Cold War and different weapon systems being tested out. I don't know the sophistication of what was being tested at the time. And, you'd have to be much more up on military history and Cold War history than I am. The only thing that has ever made sense to me is the fact that this was a military test that went wrong. If you're Russia trying to attack something, I don't think you're going to pick a chicken barn on Belle Island necessarily. I mean, yes, it is nondescript, it's out of the way, and who's going to care about a chicken barn on Belle Island? But it just seems like an odd target to go after. I mean, there's been theories about, because it's an island made of iron ore, that there might have been some magnetic properties that would have caused the lightning strike to happen. Because if you study lightning, you know that lightning actually goes from the ground to the sky, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And so there's been those kinds of theories. But, it's always, the problem with all these things is that to what end? If that's the case, then what was trying to be proved? Who was trying to get a point here? And that's the part that, will probably always remain a mystery. I suspect that if this was shenanigans between Russia and America, and somebody made a huge mistake and something wasn't supposed to happen, it will be lost to history, because that would have caused, goodness knows, the amount of international incidents or perhaps even warfare in the 1970s. I mean, we forget how, we think it's bad now. I mean, my goodness, we would go to school convinced we were going to get under our desks and have to avoid World War III in the 1970s and early 80s even. It'd be fun if it was something more nefarious. My goodness, it'd be, again, go over there, put up a fence, start charging admission. But at this point now, I don't know. I'd love to know what the truth of it was, but I don't think it's ever been satisfactorily answered. It may never be satisfactorily answered.
What about a less, sensational theory of it being a super bolt, lightning strike?
Certainly yeah, you're right. That's also been something. The superbolt theory or the superbolt idea has been around, has been, part of this discussion as well. That could very well be the case. I believe that's a weather phenomenon that
Yes.
people have put forward. And, if superbolts happen on a fairly regular basis, it could lightning strikes all the time around this world and often strikes at sea with absolutely no impact. It strikes in the middle of nowhere with absolutely no impact. We get the occasional forest fire out of it, or a golfer gets unlucky or something. In this particular instance, there could be superbolts happening all around the world that just never had this particular impact.
Well, it's all very entertaining, and I definitely, I don't know if I lean one way or another on it because I'm kind of new to this particular incident. But did you have any theories that I guess that are your favorite, even if they're outlandish? I know there's some floating around there like time travel and stuff like that.
Well, the thing I like about time travel, somebody smarter than me once said it, is that if time travel was possible, it'd already be done. It's funny, again, I guess I sort of fall into the area of the wishful thinking. Like, I wish it was something that you could really hang your hat on and really get to grips with and become something tangible, There's test sites, Roswell, for example. My goodness, the people who've made pilgrimages to Roswell because it's supposedly a secret military base. Well, good luck getting on any military base. They're all secret. So, but, certain things enter our consciousness and they capture our imaginations, which, as a storyteller is a fantastic thing. I made an entire living out of telling stories. And I wish you well with what you're starting, the path that you're going down in telling stories. They're the most fun things in the world.
Oh, yeah.
If nothing else out of this, if you've learned a little bit about a weird little island off the coast of the North Atlantic, well, then that's fantastic too. I'm sure our tourism department would be happy to have you come visit. It's there's nothing that has cropped up that I've kind of went, oh, it could be that. That does kind of make sense. And other than it's either a military thing that went awry or it's just some really weird weather phenomena and we were just unlucky enough to get hit by it that day. In either
Or
instance.
exploding chickens.
Exploding chickens. Those chickens did something to somebody that day. And it must have, I don't know. Has anybody asked Colonel Sanders what he was up to in the 1970s? Maybe.
No, but I think I'll try to get him on the line next and see.
I think you should, Josh. I think we've opened up a line of inquiry here that has heretofore been unexplored. So, the KFC Ray, my goodness.
KFC Ray, yes. Telltale Guys breaking it.
There's your title. Is the KFC Ray real?
KFC Ray, I like it.
And did it hit Newfoundland in 1978? So that's as good as any. That's as good as any to me.
All right. Well, I think maybe we'll leave it at that, and then we'll see if maybe we can explore that in the future, perhaps. Russell, I appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing your story and experience of the Bell Island boom. Is there anything else you'd like to share or add?
Josh, I think podcasting is a fantastic thing. I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm so glad so many people come to the table with their points of view. And it's radio on demand, and I've worked in radio my whole life. I love people who tell stories, so I just want to commend you on doing that. And may you tell stories for many years to come, and I hope you get to hear many more interesting ones like this one. And who knows, you may even hear some really interesting ones on this one yet to come that are far more far-fetched than my simple explanations.
Oh, no, appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you for the kind words. And if you have any updates for us, let me know. We'll have you back on.
Anytime you want to chat, Josh, I'm happy to be here.
All right. Thank you, Russell. All right. Well, that was a pretty cool interview, if I may say so myself, especially to hear from somebody who was actually there and experienced it.
I got to say, I commend you, Josh. Like that was an excellent interview. You kind of you guided the whole process, and obviously he's a professional. He's been in broadcasting for 30 plus years.
Oh, yeah.
But that was just that was really well done. Everyone spoke clearly. It was wonderful, and it was just I just got to say I was impressed. That was fun.
Yeah, well, it's easy when your interviewer or interviewee is much better at it than you are.
Yeah.
So he knew how to handle himself. So I didn't have to do too much. But yeah, it was great. So let's talk about this a little bit more, Zane.
Sure.
And before, let me just recap a little bit of about the island here, so we can kind of set it a little bit better. So Bell Island, as you see on the map here, this is where it is over in Canada. Right, it's on the edge, the eastern edge of Canada, way out there, kind of by itself. Here's a little bit closer zoom in on Newfoundland, and the area where it is. See here, that little island, tiny little island.
Yeah, and it's like in a bay, like he said. So okay, that's
Yeah.
a good
So the
visual.
island, it's about 6 miles long by 2 miles wide, about 13 square miles in Conception Bay, Canada. And that is one of the bays in Newfoundland. So it's cliffy, as was mentioned in the interview. It's kind of like 150, 200 feet above sea level. It's just it's kind of a weird little island out there. Here's some better pictures of it.
Oh, yeah, because I mean, he described how it was mostly flat. I guess there's some higher terrain there, but look at those sharp cliffs right there. I wonder did he say how high they can get? Or are they?
Yeah, he said a couple hundred feet. So like those cliffs are a couple hundred feet down.
It's kind of terrifying.
Yeah, it's not something you want to jump off of, but there are beaches there, kind of like isolated. You kind of have to get down and get to them. But yeah, pretty flat on top. Has some trees, but pretty area though. I mean, you look at these scenes here, campgrounds and stuff, but not too many people live there. So it's not hugely populated. It's sparse, right? And I think today it has about 2,000 people that live there. Back in the 70s, it was about 5,000. At its peak, because it was a big mining town, there was like 12,000-ish people that lived there. In the 60s, before it started to decline.
Right.
Mostly, iron ore stuff. That's what they were doing up there. Mining community. So of particular interest, and he mentioned where he lived on the island, is the north end of the island here. So here's where I'm showing the map, is where his house was. That's where he was when he heard the boom, right?
Okay.
And down in the south end of the island, that's where it actually hit, or that was the epicenter where everything is thought to have happened. So,
I like
all the way on the other end.
Your little clip art text here that you threw in on the screenshots.
Yeah, that was actually his writing, but it's pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it gives you a great idea of how far. I'll just back there, top end, south end, and because the island's not too big, but 6 miles away, I guess he was more maybe 4 or 5 miles away from where it was. It kind of gives you an idea of just how, I guess, big the sound was. That it kind of, hey, what's that? Let's go, check it out.
Even though he said it was around 4-ish miles away, I just in my head while listening to it, it seemed like it was closer. But seeing how he was on north, their home is in North Island, the neighbor south island. Yeah, that must have been just. And he made it sound like it was just deafening, where they were in their house getting ready for their dinner/lunch. So I just can't imagine how loud it would be for the Bickford home and anyone nearby, and especially the sad chickens.
Yeah, especially the chickens here. But this is, would maybe be a good thing to insert here, Zane, is another witness account of the event actually closer to the epicenter where it happened. And I have here actually a clip. Well, it's actually Zane reading as Darren Bickford, a young man, or he was a kid that experienced this. He was right there when it happened at the Bickford home. I think that was his grandfather's farm house type of place where it happened. So he was riding his bike around there, and he heard heard it. So here's what he had to say about the actual event. So let me go ahead and play this for everybody. Hopefully we can hear it. Turn it up.
I was outside riding my pedal bike, and I knew one of my favorite shows comes on television at 11, so I was pedaling back home. As I approached the end of our driveway, all the birds stopped chirping, all the dogs stopped barking. It just went so still. And then it was both. It's like a shotgun blast, followed by a ball of light, and then followed immediately after the second ball. The ground shook underneath me. It was the biggest noise I've ever heard in my life. It was hovering off the ground when it appeared out of thin air, and beautiful colors of blue made up most of the center of the ball. And outside of the blue, there was orange and yellow, mixing together. And then just like that, the ball of light just disappeared into thin air. I was terrified of what it was, but I was transfixed by it. The ball of light and the colors and the way it swirled around, it was as if you couldn't help but stare at it, even though I was scared. It was all over in 4 or 5 seconds. But those 4 or 5 seconds are burned into my brain, just like a roll of film.
And so I want to let everyone know I can't actually raise my voice a couple octaves like that. So it's a rare talent. Not many people can do it. You know, I was into acting for a bit. I was trained professionally. So
Yeah, it was very well done.
I hope all of you were impressed. So, or, you know, I'm a short guy, you know, just call me a munchkin. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I think you're just channeling your inner 12-year-old really for it.
There you go.
You know, that's how this the Darren
Not hard
was.
to do.
Yeah. So he was 12 years old at the time when he saw, you know, lights with this thing as well.
Mhm.
Russell only heard the sound.
Yeah.
People closer to the actual thing saw lights, and experienced a lot of other weird phenomenon with the, you know, electrical appliances like radios, you know, shooting out sparks. I think some TVs exploded. Some like electrical things popped off the walls and clocks went crazy type of thing. Just kind of weird phenomenon with it, you know.
And Russell was about this age.
Yes.
A little bit older, maybe.
No, he was young. He was a little bit younger than
Okay.
Darren here. And actually, case in point, I wanted to note, and this was kind of interesting what Russell was saying, but the cultural differences in Canada versus the US is that, you know, Canadians weren't so much looking for attention, right?
Mhm.
And I saw like a lot of accounts online, like, you know, and you'll find it if you look up, you know, the Bell Island Boom. You can find interviews of this kid giving his account for a TV station. But, you know, he talks about it earnestly. But lots of people think, oh, he was just exaggerating, kid looking for attention and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
You know, Russell, you know, he knew this guy. I mean, they weren't like, you know, they weren't quite the same age, so they weren't like best buddies hanging out, but, you know, he knew of him from school a little bit. He was a few grades ahead of him. And he's like, you know, he was just trying to help out the TV guys and talk to them. He wasn't looking to be like, oh, I'm going to be the biggest star on the island type of thing. And
Right.
that's a big cultural difference, I guess. You know, not everybody, it's a generalization, you know, like
Sure.
Americans like the spotlight more so than, say, you know, Canadians. They're just kind of like not as egocentric, I suppose, is a good way to explain it. But I thought that was an interesting point he made. Like, you know, why would anybody make up a story about this? It's just, we didn't care that much, you know?
Right. And I think even, you know, all the people who are living on this island, they're kind of isolated in a way, even though it's not that far to get to the mainland. You know, yeah, there's no urgency to make yourself really well known. It's like when you are raised in that type of society, you know, it's more of a low key life. And this weird thing happened to happen. And, you know, it's kind of hard for them to explain. And it's interesting that Russell said that himself, his family, friends, they're like, well, that was weird. Let's just keep on going with our lives, you know?
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal for him, you know, just like they didn't think about it. And you know, too, in the late 70s, you know, the points that Russell was making too, is like you weren't always inundated with media or social media and TV stuff like that. So it's not like you were trying to like get sensationalized out there. You know, it's just like, yeah, something happened. You know, what are you gonna do about it? You know, okay, bye.
Right.
Nice, thanks for coming. You know, so you know, it's very interesting points. But okay, so we got the loud boom, right? Accounts of electronics around the island going crazy, like radios and such, as I mentioned. TVs exploding, lights. So what's going on, right? What are some of the theories on this thing? And I guess before I go into anything more in depth, and do you have any kind of ideas of theories or things that you might speculate at this time? We can go into them deeper at the end of the show, but just interested if you had any kind of thoughts off the top of your head about this thing.
Well, I didn't really know much about this event going into it. And after like kind of listening to it, there's the logical scientific part of me that thinks, well, this island is made of natural iron ore. I can see how there could be some crazy weather events where you can have some, what was the name of the type of lightning bolt that's really rare?
Super bolts,
which I don't even really know that much about, but I can guess what they are. But that kind of makes sense to me that could be this weird atmospheric phenomenon that just like, for whatever reason, it just struck this part of the island and made damage to this house. That kind of makes sense to me. The whole military testing thing, I don't know. I just feel like this doesn't seem like the type of area where they would do it. Maybe more so when the war was going on. But the part that I do kind of like is, what if it is some sort of scientific phenomenon like time travel or some sort of portal opening. I love that. But we can
sure
go more into that. But I think that the whole iron ore thing makes sense to me, that it created some sort of weird electrical event or something like that.
Okay, well, we can get into those theories a little bit here. And yeah, just to kind of recap, like there wasn't a whole lot of damage done, for the noise that was made. It was so loud and, spread so far that you would expect there would have been a lot more damage. But really, it was just kind of like a shed kind of got knocked over a bit. Some chickens died. And there's some accounts that there was some, damage to the ground, like 3 holes or something like that, but nothing like crazy. So it's kind of a mystery. But I guess some of the leading theories here, and this is, supersonic jets, right?
Right.
They produce sonic booms. So you think, oh, okay, maybe sonic booms is what the Belle Island boom was. Specifically the Concorde, because in the late 70s, early 80s, that thing was flying around, right?
Right.
And they did fly fairly close to the island. I think Russell mentioned that. But they weren't like over land, right? So I mean, like you could see them off in the distance, and you could hear them. So your sonic booms would create some kind of noise. But like I said, they mostly flew over the Atlantic between Washington, D.C. and, up along the coast and then over to New York New York and then across the Atlantic Ocean. But what was weird was that I guess supersonic flights were prohibited at this time over land. So they weren't allowed to fly over land, so they wouldn't have a sonic boom over land. And that was because, they produced such a big noise that it disturbed people. So in 1973, the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, they said, no, you can't fly over land. And then other countries like Canada and wherever other places were flying supersonic jets, they said, okay, we're going to pass these same kind of laws. So nothing will fly over the populations and stuff like that. So that's kind of weird, but perhaps maybe.
Well, before we move on, if we're about to, one thing that just doesn't make sense to me, and like when you see sonic booms happening for whatever aerial craft, usually that boom, that like impact is like, isn't it just like in the immediate vicinity of that aircraft, or like this? I guess you were about to bring it up, but
Yeah.
like, I mean, would it have an impact all the way to the ground like that? Wouldn't it have to be closer?
Yeah, so I'll get into that a little bit later here with
Okay.
like what happens during a sonic boom and stuff like that.
Okay, perfect.
But I wanted to kind of make the case that these aircraft weren't allowed to fly over land at this time. They weren't supposed to be there. So why would a civilian plane like the Concorde be creating sonic booms right over this tiny little island in Canada, right? And so you think, okay, well maybe it was military planes. They create sonic booms. Well, they have kind of the same restrictions, right? And actually, I got this from the Air Force, straight from one of their websites, about their procedures with dealing with sonic booms in supersonic aircraft. They said, I'll quote here: procedures require that whenever possible, flights be over open water above 10,000 feet and no closer than 15 miles from shore. Supersonic operations over land must be conducted above 30,000 feet or when below 30,000 feet in specifically designated areas approved by Headquarters United States Air Force. So that's directly from the Air Force.
Okay.
So they're not allowed to do this stuff either, right? But there are certain cases where they can, like if they're in a hot pursuit of, like, of an enemy aircraft over the airspace and they need to
Right.
catch it, or there's some kind of mission requirement for it, to like catch up to like an unresponsive vehicle or aircraft that's flying around or something. They
Mhm.
need to catch it. Those are the exceptions, but there were no incidents like that over Bell Island around this time. So
Right.
the military probably wouldn't be doing that.
And I can only imagine, and you probably have more insight in this because you were in the military, but if there are instances where U.S. aircraft, Canadian aircraft, they have to go over land and go at these speeds, it would probably be a very desolate area, and it wouldn't be over an area that has a population or something like that.
Well, if they're doing training and stuff like that, they have to go over water if they're going to be doing sonic boom type stuff.
Okay.
Otherwise, if they're over land, it's got to be authorized. Like those two things I told you about. If they're chasing down something,
Okay.
typically they're not going to be doing that because it just causes too much noise.
Right.
So what's maybe another kind of another theory, perhaps like a mind control beam? Ooh, that sounds scary. Like some kind of radio waves from a weapon, like the Russians might be doing, sending out some like electronic beam bouncing off people's heads or something like that. That's kind of an out there theory. I didn't really see much about that would be credible, so I'm like, nah, I kind of discount that. But you know, it was the Cold War. There's lots of crazy stuff happening.
Lots of different type of testing that we probably never know about.
Sure, yeah, that's true. A lot of it classified, but probably let's kind of stay on this sonic boom theory here. So on the East Coast, in this slide here, what you're seeing, and you can describe it, I guess, to people if you want. It's fairly simple, though.
Well, yeah, it's just we're looking at the eastern seaboard of the United States, and we have a lot of little red dots just on going along the seaboard, and I'm assuming these are sonic boom events.
Close. So in the late 70s, in like 1977, from like December 2nd until 1978, March 3rd-ish, there were, it's like a 4-month period, there was a series of the East Coast booms, right? And these were things that people were hearing, all these booms going off from South Carolina on up to, past Maine, a little bit into Canada there. Not quite to Newfoundland where Bell Island was, but these were about like 600 or so booms that were caused over this time span of 4 months or so. And everybody was like, what's going on with these sounds here? And the public, were getting kind of agitated about it and demanded answers and stuff like that. But let me play for you. Here's a video. And this is going to be a Dr. Kevin Shefford from NASA, and he's going to be describing sonic booms for you. And it's a little bit lengthy, but we'll talk about it here. So let me play
Any
that.
vehicle traveling faster than the speed of sound creates a sonic boom. What actually happens is shock waves, which are pressure rises, are developed near the airplane. And as those travel to the ground, what we perceive as a noise, in fact, is this sudden pressure jump. Much like a rifle crack or a balloon popping. In fact, what you hear are two booms, closely separated in time, boom, boom. And you could visualize it as two rifle cracks or as two claps of thunder.
A common misconception about the sound barrier is once it has been broken, there is just one quick noise, and then the noise dissipates. One reason this misconception is so prevalent is that most people hear a sonic boom when they're standing in a stationary position on the ground. What actually happens is when the aircraft breaks the sound barrier, it continues to break it as long as it's flying supersonically.
Any observer on the ground, hears the airplane go by. If you picture a boat in the middle of a creek and the bow wave from the boat, you watch the boat go by, and a little while later, that bow wave passes you on the riverbank. People further down the riverbank have the exact same experience. So what's happening is, in the case of the airplane, it's dragging this boom carpet behind it all the way across the country.
Depending on weather and altitude, the sonic boom created by the aircraft can be heard in a path of about 60 miles wide for the entire distance of the flight. So, if an aircraft is flying from New York to Los Angeles, the sonic boom will be heard consistently across the country in a 60-mile wide path. This is the foremost reason supersonic flights are not allowed to fly over land in the United States.
Okay, so
Okay.
sonic boom dogs. We could pause for a second.
Yeah. Let me see if she needs any help real quick.
Okay, I'll pause recording.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, speaking of loud sounds, my dogs are barking there, but oh well.
Yeah, maybe it's a Belle Island dog, a giant dog that just barked.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah. So that kind of explains the sonic booms for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of going back to this slide here with the East Coast booms going on. So everybody's like, hey, what's going on? Investigate this. So it got so, I guess, raucous in the public that President Carter actually took these events serious enough to look into them, right? So then he's like, Department of Defense, check it out. And they did a report, the Navy did a report, and they concluded that the booms on the East Coast were from supersonic planes bouncing sonic booms off the upper atmosphere. So of those 600 or so events that happened on the East Coast, 2/3 of them were attributed to supersonic aircraft, mostly military, but also, I guess, the Concorde, although that flew mostly around New York. But, Canada, they said, I don't know. I don't think that quite explains them all away. There aren't really any supersonic planes around the time, and they shifted the Concorde's flight path. So you still have, about 200 of these booms on the East Coast that weren't explainable. So, but for the US, they're like, yeah, about 2/3 of them were sonic booms, so that's good enough. Okay, on to the next thing. You know how the government does, right?
Yeah, that sounds about par for the course.
Yeah. So right here, though, this is the flight path of the Concorde.
Okay.
So you can kind of see where it flew, and it did fly close to Newfoundland. There, you can see kind of like in the top middle or left middle there. That's Newfoundland.
Okay.
So Belle Island, as Russell said, he could see them off in the distance, and fairly close, but not over land. And so that yellow line there, I think that was from Europe to North America.
All right.
And the red one is from North America to Europe. And then the green one was like an overflow additional line that they could fly if those other two were filled up with something.
So on the right side, the east side of this map, we're seeing, I guess, the UK. Is that correct? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yeah, that's England over there.
Okay, got it.
So that's the Concorde's path. Now, normal airplane flights, they fly about 30,000 feet high. And the Concorde, when it was flying supersonic, it was 50 to 60,000 feet high. So I mean, it was up there, right? So I don't think this boom was that, just because it was so much more louder than that was.
Right.
So military, what were they? Military tests of those, particularly not so much the East Coast booms. I think military experimental flights might explain some of those, but a lot of them were not.
Yeah.
But I still think that event particularly was separate from the Bell Island boom, even though because one, the spacing, I'll go back to the slide real quick. You can see like all of them clustering right here in the boom. I mean, that's a gap of a couple hundred miles, I think.
Right.
There was no reports of anything up there. And then the time frame was off. This was in April. The Bell Island boom was in April, and these East Coast booms kind of ended around March.
Mm-hmm. And in that map, the Bell Island boom was about, like as Josh said, like a couple hundred miles northeast of like that pattern of different booms on the eastern seaboard.
But what is interesting, and as we get into theories, I mean, you'll find like pieces of them kind of work in some places of this Bell Island. The Bell Island guys, they said that they could hear it about 60 miles away from the epicenter, right? Which lines up to the sonic boom that was explained by the doctor clip I played. Like it travels about 60 miles, a sonic boom, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. But, they said the sonic booms, you got two noises. You got boom, boom, right? That wasn't heard at Bell Island. It was just one big loud boom. So like bits and pieces, but not everything, right? So maybe here's another theory then. If the sonic booms don't fit, what about some energy weapons and like weather modification type of things, right? Cloud seeding and such, artificial lightning. So in 1974, a Nevada nuclear physicist, Dr. Frederick Winterberg, he wrote a paper about creating a pulsating electron beam. And the military thought, hey, we can use that and apply it for, war type of stuff. But, could they have developed that within 4 years from 1974 to 1978 to make some kind of beam weapon that was powerful enough to make that boom?
I mean, you always hear that government technology is more advanced than what is currently out in that time period. But I initially kind of thought of that myself, but it seems kind of far-fetched.
Yeah, so like laser beams and those type of technologies were kind of like in their early stages, highly classified. But for Bell Island, they did have some scientists from the United States and other places, but particularly two from Los Alamos, New Mexico. And that's a big experimental base out in New Mexico for the military. That's the place where they developed the nuclear bomb, right? High level stuff. So they had two scientists from there that went to Bell Island specifically to kind of investigate these noises or this one noise. And it was relatively quickly. So it's like they were tracking it, right? They knew this thing was going to be there because remember, we didn't have the internet back then and news didn't move like it did today, unless it was like a huge event. And the Bell Island, while, it was kind of like a big, unique event, it wasn't like taking the nation by storm, right? It was kind of isolated out there. So these two scientists, they show up, do a little bit of investigation, see what was happening, talk to some people. I think they spoke to one geologist, kind of alluded to the fact that, they knew it was going to, they were kind of knowing this sound might happen around this area of some sort. So what were they talking about? Yeah. They said that
how could they track this? Like, what technology are they using?
Well, they said they were using, I guess it was kind of said or mentioned that they were using satellites. Because remember, during the Cold War, we were using satellites to track like nuclear bomb blasts and stuff like that. So they saw this big amount of energy that was released and they're like, hey, what was that? Let's go see what that was about. So that's kind of why they were there so fast, because it was concerning. They saw it on the satellites and they're like, this is bigger than anything that we should see, right? In fact, they said, I think, that they were kind of shocked that the amount of energy that was discharged was so great that the entire island should have been flattened But when they got there wasn't that much damage. Remember, just that shed and some chickens were dead, right? So that kind of was, I guess, perplexing to some extent. So the scientists didn't spend too much time there. They left. I think one of their names was Robert Fryman. He worked on RFID technology. He was like, I think he was like the co-inventor of that or something, and that was using radio frequencies that track tags and stuff like that. That's how we use it nowadays. So kind of weird. So they visit some booms here.
Dogs are all about the booms.
Yeah, all about the booms. So when they visited, though, these scientists, they didn't really go through the normal channels. Like normally when U.S. officials go to Canada for something like this, they kind of interact with like their State Department type of thing. Like, hey, we're sending you 2 scientists for your State Department. Okay, we'll take them to the place. They just kind of showed up and did their own thing, right? They didn't really tell anybody. So that's kind of weird. Like they just showed up, didn't tell anybody, and then, okay, so that was weird. Usually, they go through official channels to do investigations, but they did not this time. So
is it weird?
Lasers.
Is it? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
sketchy government stuff. I don't know.
It's a little bit. You're trying to keep something under wraps, right? You're not trying to make a big noise about it. So as far as like energy weapons goes, lasers and stuff, they weren't invented until like 60s. Right. And by the late 70s to the 80s, the military started to really dive into developing laser and high energy weapon systems, beam type weapons. And this is kind of what this chart is showing, saying is kind of like the electromagnetic spectrum and how powerful things are. And then like kind of like what size the beams are or whatever. It's a little bit wonky, I guess. I'm not an electrical guy, but I think if you're watching it on YouTube, you'll understand what it's saying. I'm not going to try to explain it, though. It's very, it's a little complicated here.
Yeah.
So let's see here. This is an energy weapon that we currently have. So, okay, in the 1960s, you have the first ruby laser, and then by 65, the first chemical laser. And they use like hydrogen fluoride and produced 1 kilowatt of power, which would be about the equivalent of 100-watt light bulb running for 10 hours. And this is when the military, I guess, really got interested. Back in the mid-60s, they're like, oh, I guess we can use lasers. It looks like they're generating some power now, which not a lot at the time, but that's enough to like, okay, this seems like something we can maybe develop. So in 1968, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, better known as DARPA, they do all like the weird military like experiments and scientific robots, and they're doing like cutting edge stuff. Well, they produced a laser capable of generating 100 kilowatts, and then by 1975, the Navy made one that could produce 250 kilowatts. So you can see the powers increasing of laser beams very quickly here. And in the early 80s, the High Energy Laser System Test Facility recently started researching the directed energy weapons. This is what this thing is here. This is a directed energy weapon. And I think about, if you remember, if you're old enough, in the 80s, this is what Reagan's Star Wars program was. That's what they were talking about, these laser type things, which they kind of said it tongue in cheek because they thought it was, I guess most people thought it was ridiculous. Like, oh, we can't have laser beams shooting down stuff. That's Star Wars stuff. Right. Well, they were really developing it, and it was coming along, right? So that particular facility that researched these was from White Sands, New Mexico. And that's where they were doing all the tests for that kind of stuff. And things like high power propagation beams, beam control techniques, pretty much anything you think of when you think of Star Wars. That's what they're testing out with lasers. And I'll probably stop there as far as getting deep into the weeds on laser development and stuff like that. But it's evident around this time, it's all coming to a head, I guess, or like their production capabilities for lasers around the time of the Belle Island boom. So late 70s, early 80s, right? So could a beam have been like an errant early test experiment of some sort that they were doing at that time? I don't know. I don't know if we were capable of generating anything that powerful using beam technology then.
Mhm.
But how much power did it generate? I don't know. It's hard to say. But let me do this. Let me play for you a couple more videos here. This is which one do I want to do first? I'll do this one first.
Where was this? It said on that slide.
This is going to be in the Pacific Ocean. This is a Navy test. That went pretty quick. I'll play it again.
Yeah. I missed it.
Yeah, watch what's happening here. So this is an amphibious transport dockship USS Portland successfully disabled an unmanned aerial vehicle or UAV with a solid state laser. So that was in 2020. All right.
So what looked kind of like contrails there? That was the beam that hit it, right? Like
Yeah.
kinda
Here's another video of it.
Whoa.
Now that looks like Star Wars stuff, right?
Yeah, it does.
That obviously has some kind of filter on the camera so you can see it.
Yeah.
But that's the I'll play it one more time so people can check it out here. It's a big laser beam coming off a ship, right? That is where we're at. Well, that was in 2020, so we're probably a little bit more advanced then. But back in the 70s, did we have stuff mounted on it? I don't know. Here's another clip. This is going to be
In the mid-1990s, the Air Force began experimenting with the idea of putting a high-energy laser aboard a modified Boeing 747 to shoot down missiles. Thursday afternoon, that idea took another step toward reality. The airborne laser test bed destroyed a ballistic missile off the Central California coast. It was the first time a liquid-fuel ballistic missile was shot down from an airborne platform. The ALTB is a vanguard of America's directed energy program. It provides the Air Force with a potential missile defense platform that can attack multiple targets at the speed of light from hundreds of miles away. The airborne laser testbed also destroyed a solid fuel missile target earlier this month.
Okay, so that was back in 2010. So before those two laser beam clips from the Navy ships I showed you. And it's gotten more powerful since then, obviously. But that was like the first time they were really, I guess, doing it successfully, or at least letting people know. So do you think maybe was that technology used in the late 70s or 80s? I'm kind of skeptical.
I am too, because do you know offhand like this modern image of this, laser deployment weapon? How large is that? Do you have an idea?
That thing, I guess, is probably about the size of what can I compare it to? I was going to say trash can, but it's much bigger than a trash can.
Is like a farm silo? Is that?
No, it's a little smaller than that. It's kind of more. So I think like if you think like it has the footprint of like your kitchen table, maybe.
Okay, well, I guess we saw on that that military aircraft that it was as big as the nose. So
yeah,
I feel like that was fairly recent. Then you go back, 20 some odd years. I feel like the technology the laser machine would have to be bigger. So I just can't imagine they would be able to fit that on a plane. And I just don't know the geography well enough. Like, let's say they shot a laser at Bell Island. Is there like a place, a mountain that's high enough where they can shoot directly towards that? Didn't seem like it.
No. So maybe it wasn't man-made. Maybe it was more of a natural phenomenon. Maybe the next theory here. Let's see. Maybe it was lightning, Zane. And we had kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier with super bolts. But lightning, okay, so a typical bolt of lightning produces about 7 gigajoules of energy. And I know everyone's like, yes, I know exactly what that means.
Right.
Well, that's enough electricity to power a small town for a day. Okay. So maybe something like Bell Island, the amount of people on Bell Island would be enough power to power all their homes. But that's a typical bolt of lightning isn't really that big. It's not. And when Russell was talking about it, it didn't sound like regular lightning. We've all heard that. So scientists speculated that the Belle Island boom produced enough electrical energy in a few moments of the boom to supply Montreal with enough electricity for 6 hours. So that's massively much larger, right? Now, I'm not sure how much energy that city consumed in 1978 in 6 hours. I couldn't find those stats. But I don't think a single.
Well, you
lightning
didn't do
bolt,
a good enough job.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But regardless, I don't think a single lightning bolt could have done that because the Super Bolt, the big lightnings, have about 1,000 times more energy than a typical lightning bolt. So that'd be 7,000 gigajoules. That seems possible to emit the amount of energy for 6 hours of a 1978 Montreal, perhaps, right? That's a lot more energy. But I don't know. I'm talking about gigajoules and stuff like that. Maybe you electrical whizzes, you can correct us if we're wrong there. But a little bit more about super bolts here is super bolts. They happen mostly in the northern hemisphere in a winter time from November to December. January, February, 1,000 times more powerful than a typical lightning bolt. 90% of regular lightning strikes over land, whereas super bolts, they're found primarily over water. And super bolts make up 5 in every 10 million lightning hits. So they're very rare. That's why most people haven't heard of them. You don't experience them. And usually a large bolt's lasting a little bit longer than the amount of time, and they're in the upper atmosphere more so usually. So when they happen high up there. That's probably why most people don't experience them.
In this picture here, is this supposed to be a Super Bolt?
No, that's just a lightning. That's a regular lightning. Right?
Okay.
So think about a Super Bolt is going to be more massive than that.
Okay.
So what is this then? So residents think, I don't know. It wasn't lightning. It was more like an explosion because we've heard lightning cracks and stuff like that. And there was no thunderstorm activity in the area at the time, and it was over land, so that's not where super bolts usually happen. And it was in the off months it was in April. It wasn't in the winter time, right? So that's kind of atypical for the lightning bolts. And then Russell mentioned that the sound was more like a sonic boom noise instead of your thunder noise, right? So it doesn't quite line up, right? So what else could it be? That's another lightning strike. Oh, I'll go. Nope. How do I go back? Where's my back button? Oh, there it is. Got it. I'll stay here. So what else could produce a massive amount of electricity, Zane? Back to man-made theories here. EMPs. We've heard of those, right?
Right.
EMPs. Okay. So they're
electric magnetic pulse.
Correct. Yeah. They're short pulses that create electrical surges of energy. And, really we're talking about there's two options, especially in 1978, that can produce this. Nuclear bombs produce EMPs, and something like, solar flares can create EMPs that will surge electrical grids and take them out. But, at the time in 1978, there was no solar flare activity happening, and definitely there was no nuclear bombs that went off. So there was no detected radiation or anything like that. So, why would an EMP, that theory doesn't quite add up either, right? But the electrical surge does explain, the circuits getting overloaded and things exploding in the houses and clocks turning really fast or something like that. But the problem is that an EMP, like I said, at least then, is like you need a nuclear device to go off for that.
Yeah.
You can create smaller ones, I think, and maybe more so nowadays, but they're not really producing something that's going to affect the whole town, right? It's just, you can't make them that big unless you have a bomb.
And solar flares, if that's what occurred, it usually there's not like physical damage that occurs, right?
Right. Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. It's atmospheric plasma that's hitting. Essentially, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not coming down and squashing a chicken shed and killing chickens. Right. It's
Right.
not really an effect of that. So okay. So we have all those theories then, right? And there was this one theory that I kind of dismissed offhand, and I thought most people barely mention it. Like, oh, maybe a meteor hit the shed and caused the boom or whatever, but there was no crater. So everyone's like, nah, it wasn't a meteor. But then I thought, you know what? And I might have stumbled upon a new theory here, Zane. I hadn't seen anybody else mention this. So I think this might be a good candidate here, at least for, this particular thing. So meteorite, maybe, yes. But there's no impact crater. But there's a type of meteor that could leave no impact, right? And I think I stumbled across it. Have you heard of the Tunguska event?
It sounds familiar. Yes, yeah, in Siberia, it's just like that huge crater out in the middle of the woods, right?
Well, there was no crater there, but it flattened like the forests for
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So it took place in 1908 in Tunguska, Russia, off here in Siberia. Here's a map. You can see where it took place, just out in the middle of nowhere, way up there in the Arctic, right? And they basically said that they couldn't figure out what happened here, I guess, and everything was flattened for like 800 miles, just massive trees knocked down. I think 3 people died. It would have been more if it happened over a city or something like that, but no one lives out here. I mean, it's very sparse. Mm-hmm. But they estimated the explosion was between 3 and 5 megatons. And a mystery in its own right of this Tunguska event. But I think the general most agreed upon theory is that it was an atmospheric explosion of an asteroid, probably one that was about 200 feet across or so, right? So the asteroid wouldn't have left an impact crater because it exploded in the air, right? Mm-hmm. So I did some calculations, Zane. So I was like, okay, so it's on the small end, 3 megaton explosion, about a 200-foot wide piece of rock creates a 3 megaton explosion. And that would be like, I did a conversion. So if I'm wrong, let me know, but I think I did it right. It would be 12.5 million gigajoules, which seems about twice as big as, or more than twice as big as the Bell Island boom.
Okay.
So let's half that, maybe. Let's make the rock between 1 and 2 megatons is what you would need to get about 7 million gigajoules, right? It's still too big by about 1,000 because it was 7,000 gigajoules in Bell Island, right? So a 1 to 2 megaton explosion is 1,000 times stronger than what happened over Bell Island for half the size of what Tunguska was. So you got to whittle that down a little bit more. So so we're looking at something that would need to produce 0.00167 megatons. So very small, right? As opposed to the 200-foot wide thing. So relatively small. It could be done by a smaller meteorite, perhaps. So I asked, well, so I don't know how big that is. It would be a rock like fist size, maybe. I don't know, something like that. But then I asked, well, okay, that's part of it, but for the boom noise, right? So what can a meteor create an EMP? Like they're not, you don't think of them as like electrical, there's not producing surges of electricity, but I looked it up and it turns out that it is possible for a meteorite to generate, or make an EMP essentially. I guess when it enters the atmosphere, it kind of, ionize. So theoretically, it's possible. It makes the air around it
a lot of charged particles and all that.
So a meteoric EMP or electromagnetic energy resulting from the impact, it'll happen if they hit a spacecraft or something in space. Or it can do, like, if it's coming in the atmosphere and it's ionizing. So if that happens and it breaks up, the meteor is passing through the Earth's atmosphere and it breaks up and explodes above a small town on an island in Canada, and little pieces of it are still ionized when it explodes, that would explain the light. It would explain hitting a shed, pieces of it knocking the shed over or whatever. If it's generating EMPs, it's going to send out that electrical pulse. And it would also explain, I guess, killing the chickens, because if it hit that shed, if that's where like the brunt of it was, or it exploded just above the shed, or somewhere around there, then perhaps the chickens are accounted for. The lights are accounted for, because remember the little kid who saw the lights with it, the balls of lights, you have an ionized piece of space rock and gas coming in. It's going to let off some glowing energy perhaps, and also explain the noise. So I think that's where I landed with it, as far as a good possible theory that would cover all the bases if, in fact, a meteorite can produce an EMP.
And so you're saying the explosion where everything disintegrated happened right above the shed, basically. And that's
or near it.
Because the light was seen kind of close to the ground.
Right. So, or, if it explodes above your head 30 feet or whatever, and bits of it are still glowing and they come down, but there's such small pieces, it just vaporizes into a ball of, gas. That would explain it suddenly appearing and suddenly disappearing. And then also maybe bits of it might have hit the chickens or something in the shed, or just the shed collapsing on the chickens would cause it. But if it's sending out the EMP with it as well, and some people got this strange phenomenon going on with their electricals, the thing doesn't have to be that big. It doesn't have to be the size. The Tunguska wasn't that big. It was 200 feet, relatively small for an asteroid. So if it could stay intact long enough to get close enough around the, the island, then I think that's a good possibility, and one that I hadn't seen anywhere else. Of course, I'm no astrophysicist, and I could be way off on the theory, but to me, I think that makes more sense than the military explanations, more sense than super bolts, and certainly the mind controller time travel theories that are out there.
Yeah, I think we can probably dismiss those, though they're probably the coolest theory. Arguably. So,
well, I don't know. I think ionized meteorite EMP is a pretty cool.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty interesting. I never really thought about asteroids, meteorites, but it makes sense that they could charge up so much and create that type of energy. That seems logical to me. My only thing is, like, I know there's so much resistance when asteroids and meteorites come into the upper atmosphere. I just feel like the event of it disintegrating would happen there more likely than just right above the surface.
Yeah,
but
well,
it could be an anomaly. So,
well, yeah, that's why you don't experience these things so often. It's like for meteors to make it all the way to the ground is fairly rare, but we see shooting stars all the time. That stuff making it into the atmosphere, and you see them glow and break apart. So if this thing was big enough and dense enough, I guess, to stay intact until it got just so, like Tunguska, and it blew up above everyone's heads or whatever, now that happens. And in fact, meteorites have entered the atmosphere before, and you get the whole thing without it disintegrating. So I think theoretically it's possible. It has to take the right conditions, the right rock, the right angles coming in, and that's why no one ever has these booms like that. That's really the only one of its kind.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. That is a good, nice twist on it. Because, I mean, obviously, probably a lot of people thought about the meteorite theory, but that adds a little bit of a new element to it.
Yeah. So take that and run with it, internet, I guess.
Send us your thoughts on it if you have any other theories or new theories.
Yeah. Or if I'm totally wrong, tell us in the the notes below. But I guess before we do the outro, we got to play our music for the episode, right?
Yeah. Let me cue it up. Tried to do something in the 70s vibe about the Belle Island boom, boom, words, whatever.
DJ
and-
Boom.
And so that's actually not a bad DJ name.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Rusty whispers through the trees, fog rolls in heavy and thick. Shadows dance like ghosts at sea. Belle Island's ancient homes tremble in the cold night air. Stories buried deep in stone. What was that sound? Boom, through the silence shook the ground. What truth did we find in the dark of the night? Mysteries left behind. Fishermen lost in reverie, eyes wide as the moon beneath. Northern skies and echoed cries. Lanterns flicker on cracked walls and homes, creaking with secrets old, hearts pound with forgotten calls. What was that sound? Boom, through the silence shook the ground. What truth did we find in the dark of the night? Mysteries left behind.
All right.
Yeah, that's a very sad song.
Yeah. No, kind of. Yeah, it's kind of somber.
Yeah. Oh,
but-
I did mean to mention, Zane,
Yeah.
with one of your theories before, and that's another Tunguska picture there of
Mhm.
the flattened area, with the iron ore being in the ground and attracting a lightning bolt. Perhaps I think that was a popular theory. Iron ore isn't really magnetic like that, where it's going to attract lightning bolts. So I mean, it has a little bit to it, but it's not strong enough where it's going to be attracting lightning beams. You know, so
Really? Dang it.
yeah.
I felt so confident about that.
Yeah, I know that's what I thought too when I first got into it. I was like, oh, well, clearly it's the iron ore, but you know, even if it were, I mean, you would see it be getting hit all the time, you know, so it
That's
doesn't
fair.
really happen like that. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that before I forgot about it.
Thank-
But yeah,
Thank
so
you for correcting me.
oh, not correction, just wanted to cover that theory before people are like, hey, you didn't even mention the iron ore. You know?
Yeah.
But you can yell at us in the notes if you want for other things, I'm sure. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Well, I think it's a really good episode. I'm really glad we got finally someone who we can talk to. What we'll do with that interview, since it's longer, like the full raw interview is about an hour long, we'll put it on our YouTube channel. We'll have a different playlist for it, for this interview and other interviews that we have coming up down the pipeline. So that'd be really cool, different content that you guys can check out. And so, you know, great find. Actually, yeah, Josh, how'd you find out about Russell?
Well, when I was doing research for it, and we'll put this in the show notes too, I came across an article written on the internets about it, and it had Darren in it, the quotes from Darren and some other people. So I've reached out to him. You know, I was like, "Hey, do you have the contacts for these guys? So I'd like to talk to them for this episode." And he's like, "Yeah, I could probably get you that." And I was like, and he mentioned that he heard the sound too. I was like, "Oh, well, if you heard the sound, I can interview you, because that's a firsthand account, and that'd be great." So that's how I kind of
Okay.
tracked him down from his article, and we'll put his article in the thing so you can read it as well. And,
Yeah, definitely. Like, you know, I'm sure the article will have his contact information so people can check out Russell's, you know, all his content he's made throughout the years, his writings, broadcasts, whatever he's done. I'll have to check him out too.
Yeah, and you know, if you guys have any stories like Russell firsthand accounts and stuff weird like that, feel free to reach out to us and we can see if it'd be appropriate for a story. You can send us an email at heyguys@telltaleguys.com, or reach out to us on our socials, which are Zane.
So, you know, Facebook, it's just Telltale Guys. Instagram, same thing. It's all just Telltale Guys, basically. So you'll be able to find us just searching through that. So, but
Yeah,
most
just look
importantly,
for our logo.
yeah. Same logo as you see in that top right there.
All right. Well, I guess that's all for this week. Zane, you gonna go out with a boom?
Boom. Episode over.
Josh and Zane on the scene. Belle Island, boom, big and mean. Recording news for all to see. Witness speaks, we sip our tea. Belle Island, boom, shakes the ground. Stories told miles around. First pre-recorded, play it back. Listen close, facts we unpack. Boom goes the island, boom goes the sound. Stories unfolding all around. Dogs bark loud, won't sit still. Interrupt the interview thrill. Booming barks, just one more spill. We smile, we laugh, what a thrill. Josh and Zane just chasing truth. Microphones and time to sleuth. Witness tells of light so bright. Fills the air on that dark night. Static crackling in replay. Dogs bark on, they join the fray. Through it all we find the gold. Stories shared and truth is told. Boom goes the island, boom goes the sound. Stories unfolding all around. Boom goes the island, boom goes the sound. Stories unfolding all around, all around. Dogs bark loud, won't sit still. Interrupt the interview thrill. Booming barks, just one more spill. We smile, we laugh, what a thrill. Oh, a thrill. Static crackling in replay. Dogs bark on, they join the fray. Through it all we find gold. Stories shared and truth is told.